I watched my own son hand a manila folder to a stranger in a dark suit, papers that could steal everything I'd built. Through my kitchen window, I could see them standing by Leonard's car in my driveway. My 39-year-old son and some lawyer I'd never met, discussing documents about me like I was already dead. That's when I knew my daughter-in-law Beverly had moved from planning to action. "We heard you got this nice place up here. We're moving in to put all the family drama behind us." Beverly pushed right past me with her suitcases like she owned the place just 2 hours later. I smiled and let them walk in, but the second they stepped into my living room and saw the 3 people waiting for them, my lawyer, a private investigator, and a notary, the color drained right out of their faces. "My name is Victor Brennan. I'm 58 years old, and I live in a mountain cabin outside Colorado Springs, Colorado. For 20 years, I served this country as an army mechanic, fixing everything from Humvees to helicopters in places most people can't pronounce. After I got out in 1986, I took everything the Army taught me about engines and machinery and built Brennan Auto and Machine Shop from nothing. Started in a rented garage with $2,000 and a toolbox, ended up with 15 employees and contracts with half the construction companies in the county. 2 years ago, I sold the whole operation for $1.8 million. Not bad for a guy who started fixing broken equipment in the desert. These days, I spend my mornings in my workshop building custom furniture and restoring vintage truck engines, afternoons hunting elk in the national forest or fishing for trout in the mountain streams. Evenings, you'll find me at the VFW post with guys who understand what it means to earn what you have, to build something from nothing, to serve something bigger than yourself. It's a quiet life, a peaceful life, the kind of life I earned after 20 years wearing the uniform and 18 years running a business, 7 days a week. At least that's what I thought until my family decided they wanted to cash in on it. Let me tell you about my son Leonard. He's 39 now, works as an insurance adjuster down in Denver, making about $65,000 a year. Leonard never served in the military, which was fine by me. I didn't want him going through what I went through overseas. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that everything he had, everything his family had, was because someone else did the hard work first. That someone being me. Leonard used to be different. As a kid, he'd spend every weekend in my garage, handing me tools, asking questions about engines, wanting to learn everything. "Dad, can I help? Dad, how does this work? Dad, can you teach me to weld?" That boy had curiosity, respect, and a work ethic. I was proud of him. I don't know where that kid went, but he disappeared pretty quick after Beverly showed up. The real trouble started when Leonard married Beverly Kelly 3 years ago. She's 36 years old, used to be a nurse before she decided being Leonard's wife was easier than working for a living. Beverly's got this way of looking at people and places like she's calculating what they're worth, like everything around her is just numbers on a balance sheet waiting to be cashed in. The change in Leonard was gradual at first. Phone calls got shorter. "Hey, Dad, can't talk long. Beverly needs me to..." Visits got rarer. "We'd love to come up, but Beverly thinks the drive is too long." Conversations became all about what Beverly thought, what Beverly needed, what Beverly wanted. Last Christmas was when I really started paying attention. I'd made a prime rib roast, my specialty from the Army days when I cooked for the whole motor pool, set up the dining room with my grandmother's china, had everything perfect for my son and his wife. I was telling them about finally getting the restoration finished on my 1967 Chevy pickup, how I'd tracked down original parts, rebuilt the engine, myself. Beverly kept checking her phone, rolling her eyes like I was boring her. Finally, she interrupts me mid-sentence and says, "Vic, that's nice and all, but we really should talk about your future plans. You're not getting any younger, and this place is so isolated. What if something happens to you up here? What if you have a fall, or a heart attack, or start getting confused? Leonard just sat there nodding along like one of those bobblehead dogs people put on their dashboards. "Beverly's right, Dad. We worry about you." "Worry about me?" I said. "I just passed my VA physical with flying colors. Doc says I'm healthier than most men 20 years younger." Beverly gave me this look, like she was talking to a child who didn't understand. People don't always recognize their own limitations, especially as they age. Sometimes family has to step in and help make the hard decisions. That's when I knew something was wrong. Real wrong. The moment that really opened my eyes happened about 6 months ago. I'd called Leonard's cell phone to tell him about a job opportunity I'd heard about. Better position, better pay. He didn't answer, but about 20 minutes later, he must have pocket-dialed me back because I could hear them talking. "That old man still hanging around that workshop like he's 30 years old," Beverly was saying, her voice clear as day through the phone. "When's he gonna sign things over and stop being such a burden? We could sell this place and the business money and be set for life." I held my breath, waiting for Leonard to defend me, to tell his wife she was out of line. Instead, my son said, "Soon, probably. He's been complaining about his back hurting. And you saw how confused he got at Christmas dinner, forgetting names and repeating stories." Confused? I hadn't been confused about anything. I'd been trying to share something I was proud of with my family. I hung up that phone and sat in my kitchen for about 2 hours, staring at the American flag on my wall. The one they'd presented to me when I retired from the army. Thinking about what I'd just heard. 20 years serving my country. 18 years building a business from nothing. And my own son was sitting around waiting for me to die so he could cash in. That's when I started paying real attention to what was happening around me. About 4 months ago, Dr. Irving Stone called me out of the blue. Dr. Stone's been my family physician for 15 years, knows me better than most people. He's the one who helped me deal with the back injury I got when a transmission fell off a hoist in my shop, the one who told me I was in better shape than most guys half my age. "Vic," he says, and I could hear something worried in his voice. "I got a strange phone call today. A woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law was asking me very specific questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "About dementia. About the medical process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. She told me you'd been having episodes, forgetting things, getting confused, making poor financial decisions. She wanted to know what kind of documentation would be needed to prove cognitive decline." My blood went cold. Episodes? Poor financial decisions? I'd just reorganized my entire investment portfolio the month before, moving money around to get better returns. My broker said it was some of the smartest planning he'd seen. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I hadn't observed any signs of cognitive decline in you whatsoever. In fact, I told her you were sharper than most of my patients half your age." But she kept pressing, asking about different types of tests, about how long the process takes. Dr. Stone paused. "Vic, she knew too much. This wasn't a concerned family member asking general questions. This was someone who'd done research, someone who knew exactly what documentation she'd need to make a case." I thanked Dr. Stone and made a decision that probably saved everything I'd worked for. I started conducting my own reconnaissance mission. First thing I did was install security cameras around my property. Nothing fancy, just basic trail cameras I picked up at the sporting goods store, the kind hunters use to watch game trails. I positioned them to cover my driveway, the workshop, and the back entrance to my cabin. If someone was planning something, I wanted evidence. Next, I started paying attention to Beverly's behavior whenever they visited. I noticed she spent a lot of time on her phone, always stepping outside to take calls. She'd walk around my property like she was surveying it, taking pictures with her phone for memories, she said. But the way she was photographing things, the workshop, the garage, my truck, even my tool collection, it looked more like she was creating an inventory. The third thing I did was start carrying my phone everywhere with the recorder app ready. Colorado's a one-party consent state, which means I can legally record any conversation I'm part of. 20 years in the Army teaches you to document everything, and I had a feeling I was going to need documentation. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks ago, Beverly and Leonard came up for what they said was just a casual visit. But within an hour of arriving, Beverly was asking questions. "Vic, have you thought about updating your will? Leonard and I were talking, and at your age, it's important to have things organized." "My will's fine," I told her. "But when was the last time you looked at it? Sometimes people forget they've made changes, or they sign things and don't remember. It happens more as we get older." Leonard jumped in. "Dad, Beverly used to work with elderly patients. She knows the signs when people start having memory issues." "Memory issues? I remember everything. Every engine I ever rebuilt, every contract I ever signed, every dollar I ever made or spent. But I played along. What kind of signs?" I asked. Beverly got this look in her eyes, like a hunter who'd spotted prey. Repeating stories, forgetting names, making the same financial decisions over and over. Sometimes people don't realize they're doing it. "Interesting," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Good thing I don't have any of those problems." But Beverly wasn't done. She started walking around my living room, picking up family photos, looking at my military commendations on the wall. "You know, Vic, this place is pretty isolated. If something happened to you, a fall, a heart attack, even just getting confused and wandering off, it could be hours before anyone found you. That's why I have the satellite phone." I said, "But what if you forgot how to use it? Or what if you had a stroke and couldn't speak clearly? The emergency responders might not be able to understand you." She was painting a picture, setting up a scenario. I recognized the tactic. It's the same thing used car salesmen do when they want to convince you your perfectly good truck is about to break down. "Leonard," I said, "you worried about your old man?" My son looked uncomfortable. "Well, Dad, you are getting older, and you do live alone up here." "I'm 58 years old, Leonard. That's hardly ancient." Beverly spoke up. "Age isn't just about numbers, Vic. It's about capability. And sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see when we need help." That night, after they left, I sat in my workshop surrounded by the tools I'd collected over 40 years. Wrenches and sockets and diagnostic equipment, every piece representing something I'd learned, something I'd mastered. I thought about Beverly's words, about the way she'd looked at everything like she was already calculating its value. I made another phone call. Stanley Foster and I served together in Germany back in the 80s. After he got out, he used his GI Bill to go to law school, specializes in elder law now, protecting seniors from exactly the kind of thing I suspected Beverly was planning. "Vic," he said when I explained, "the situation, you need to document everything. Every conversation, every visit, every suspicious phone call. Colorado has strong laws protecting at-risk adults, but you need evidence if someone tries to challenge your competency. What exactly are we looking at here? Guardianship fraud. They get you declared mentally incompetent, take control of your finances and property, then slowly drain everything while claiming they're acting in your best interests. I see it more often than I'd like." Stanley paused. "The good news is that you're aware of what's happening and you're cognitively sharp. The bad news is that once they file the paperwork, you're in a defensive position. We need to get ahead of this. What do you recommend?" "First, we document your mental competency with an independent medical evaluation. Second, we investigate your daughter-in-law's background. If she's done this before, there might be a pattern. Third, we prepare for legal action. Stanley gave me the name of a private investigator, a former military policewoman named Dorothy Kane. If Beverly's been planning this, Dorothy will find the evidence. I called Dorothy that same night. Within 48 hours, Dorothy had information that made me understand just how much danger I was in. "Your daughter-in-law has been busy," Dorothy told me when we met at a coffee shop in Colorado Springs. She opened a folder and spread photographs across the table. "These are surveillance photos I took yesterday. Beverly visiting Dr. Patricia Hullbrook's office in Denver." "Who's Dr. Hullbrook?" "Geriatric psychiatrist, specializes in dementia and cognitive decline assessments." Dorothy showed me another photo. "This is Beverly leaving Dr. Michael Rodriguez's office 2 weeks ago, another geriatric specialist. And here she is coming out of Dr. Sarah Williams' practice last month." I stared at the photos. She's been doctor shopping for 6 months. Each time she tells them the same story, that she's concerned about an elderly family member showing signs of cognitive decline, asking about the evaluation process, about what kind of documentation she'd need to prove incompetency. Dorothy pulled out more documents. "I also ran a background check. Beverly Kelly Brennan has an interesting employment history." "What kind of interesting?" "She used to work at Mountain View Care Center, an assisted living facility in Denver. She was terminated 18 months ago after a complaint was filed against her." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complaint?" "An 82-year-old resident named Helen Morrison accused Beverly of financial manipulation. Mrs. Morrison claimed Beverly was pressuring her to sign over power of attorney, telling her that her family didn't care about her anymore and that Beverly was the only person who really understood her needs." Dorothy leaned forward. "The facility settled the complaint quietly to avoid publicity. But Helen Morrison is still alive, still sharp, and she's willing to testify about what Beverly tried to do to her. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Beverly hadn't just decided to target me on a whim. She was a predator who specialized in elderly victims. "There's more," Dorothy continued. "I've been monitoring your property with long-range surveillance equipment. Yesterday, while you were at your VFW meeting, Beverly and Leonard came to your cabin." "What were they doing there?" Dorothy handed me a series of photos taken with a telephoto lens. Beverly walking around my workshop, opening tool chests, photographing equipment. Leonard standing in my living room with what looked like official documents. "They had keys," Dorothy said, "and Leonard was taking measurements, like he was planning renovations or preparing the place for sale." I stared at those photos like they were evidence of an enemy advance, which, in a way, they were. My own son had given my daughter-in-law keys to my home. They were surveying my property like they already owned it. "How long were they there?" asked Dorothy. "About 2 hours. Beverly spent most of her time in your workshop, photographing every tool, every piece of equipment. She even opened your gun safe and took pictures of your hunting rifles and the serial numbers." That hit me like a punch to the chest. My gun collection wasn't just hunting rifles. It included my service pistol from the Army, family heirlooms passed down from my grandfather who served in World War II. Beverly was cataloging everything I owned like she was preparing an estate sale. "Dorothy, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. In your professional opinion, how close are they to making their move?" Dorothy looked at the photos, then back at me. "Very close. The fact that they're taking measurements and doing detailed inventories suggests they're preparing paperwork. In cases like this, once they file for emergency guardianship, you have maybe 72 hours before a judge makes a preliminary ruling. 72 hours to prove I'm competent to manage my own life." "Exactly. And if they get temporary guardianship, even if you eventually win in court, they could sell your property, drain your accounts, and disappear with everything. By the time the legal system sorts it out, there might be nothing left to recover." I made a decision right there in that coffee shop. "Dorothy, I want you to set up surveillance on my property 24/7. If they come back, I want to know immediately. And I want you to dig deeper into Beverly's background. If she's tried this before, there might be other victims. What are you planning, Vic? I'm going to let them think they're winning, right up until the moment I show them they've lost." The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I went about my normal routine: coffee at 6 a.m., workshop time until noon, lunch, then either fishing or working on my truck restoration project. But every few hours, Dorothy would text me updates. Beverly made 3 phone calls to lawyers' offices. Leonard took the afternoon off work, unusual for him. Beverly visited the county courthouse, spent an hour in the records office. On Thursday morning, Dorothy called with urgent news. Vic, they just filed. Emergency guardianship petition, claiming you're a danger to yourself due to cognitive decline. There's a hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. What kind of evidence did they present? Statements from Beverly claiming you've had multiple episodes of confusion, that you've been making irrational financial decisions, that you've threatened to harm yourself. She's also got documentation from those doctors she consulted, claiming they recommend immediate evaluation. My hands were shaking with anger. Threatened to harm myself? The only thing I'd ever threatened to harm was the transmission on my 1967 Chevy when it wouldn't cooperate. Dorothy, it's time to spring our trap. I want you, Stanley, and Howard Mills, the notary, at my cabin tomorrow at 2 p.m. Make sure you're parked where they can't see. Your vehicle's from the road. What do you want me to tell them? Tell them we're having a family meeting. That evening, I got the phone call I'd been expecting. Dad? Leonard's voice sounded nervous. Beverly and I were wondering if we could come visit tomorrow. Spend some time together, talk about things. What kind of things? Just family stuff. Beverly's been worried about you, and we thought maybe we should clear the air. I almost laughed. They were coming to execute their plan, probably with legal documents already prepared, expecting to find a confused old man who'd sign whatever they put in front of him. Sure, son. Come on up. About 2 p.m. work for you? Perfect, Dad. We'll see you then. Friday morning, I was up at 5 a.m. I spent extra time in my workshop, touching the tools I'd collected over 4 decades. My first socket set from when I was an 18-year-old private, the precision instruments I'd bought when I started my business, the specialty equipment that had allowed me to build engines other mechanics couldn't touch. Every piece represented something I'd earned, something I'd mastered. If Beverly thought she could walk in and auction off my life's work, she was about to learn otherwise. Stanley arrived first, at 1:30. We'd served together in the 82nd Maintenance Company, and he understood military precision. Everything ready? He asked. Dorothy's in position with her cameras. Howard's got all the documentation. I've got 6 months of recorded conversations and enough evidence to bury them both. Dorothy showed up next, carrying what looked like a normal briefcase, but was actually sophisticated recording equipment. I've got audio and video coverage of the entire cabin. Whatever they say, whatever they do, we'll have it documented. Howard Mills, the notary, was the last to arrive. He'd brought official seals and witnessed document forms. Vic, I've been a notary for 20 years, and I've never seen a case quite like this one. You sure you want to go through with this? Howard, they're planning to steal everything I've worked for and claim I'm too senile to stop them. I'm not just going through with it, I'm going to enjoy it. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw Leonard's car coming up my driveway. Beverly was in the passenger seat, and I could see her talking animatedly, probably giving Leonard last-minute instructions on how to handle their confused, helpless victim. I opened the door before they could knock. Dad! Beverly pushed past me with her suitcases, just like always, acting like she owned the place. We heard you got this nice place up here. We're moving in to put all the family drama behind us. Leonard followed behind her, carrying more luggage and what I recognized as a legal folder. He couldn't look me in the eye. Isn't this wonderful? Beverly was already surveying my living room like she was planning renovations. Family back together at last. We've been so worried about you up here alone. Have you? I said, keeping my voice pleasant. That's interesting. Beverly walked toward the kitchen, probably planning to stage her concerned daughter-in-law act, where she'd discover evidence of my mental decline that she'd planted herself. Instead, she stopped dead in her tracks. Stanley Foster was sitting at my kitchen table in his full-dress military uniform, ribbons and all, a briefcase open in front of him. Dorothy Kane was standing by the window, holding a camera with a telephoto lens. Howard Mills was positioned by the fireplace with an official notary seal visible on the mantel. The color drained from Beverly's face so fast I thought she might faint. Leonard dropped the legal folder, papers scattering across my hardwood floor. "Beverly, Leonard," I said, walking past them to join my team. "I'd like you to meet some colleagues of mine, Stanley Foster, my attorney, Dorothy Kane, private investigator, Howard Mills, notary public." Beverly found her voice first. "What is this? What's going on?" "This," I said, settling into my chair and looking directly at my son, "is what happens when you underestimate a man who spent 20 years in the army and 18 years running a business. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when my own family started planning to rob me?" Leonard's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Beverly was looking around the room like she was calculating escape routes. "Please," I gestured toward the couch. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Stanley opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we begin, I should inform you that everything said in this room is being recorded for potential use in legal proceedings. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and Mr. Brennan has consented to record this conversation." Dorothy stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, I've been investigating your activities for the past month. I have documented evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult, and breaking and entering." She placed a series of photographs on the coffee table. "Beverly at various doctors' offices, Leonard measuring rooms in my cabin, Beverly photographing my tool collection. These were taken without our knowledge," Beverly said, her voice shaky. "This is entrapment." "Actually," Stanley replied, "surveillance of suspicious activity on private property is completely legal. What's illegal is filing false guardianship petitions and attempting to steal someone's assets through fraudulent means." Howard stepped forward with an official-looking document. "Mrs. Brennan, this is a restraining order, preventing you from filing any legal documents related to Mr. Victor Brennan's mental capacity or financial affairs. It's effective immediately." Beverly shot to her feet. "This is insane. We're family. We were trying to help." "Help?" I stood up slowly, looking at the woman who'd been planning to destroy my life. "Help by having me declared mentally incompetent? Help by stealing my property? Help by selling off everything I've spent 40 years building?" I walked over to Leonard, who was still sitting there looking like he wanted to disappear. "Son, I'm going to give you one chance to tell the truth. Did you know what your wife was planning?" Leonard looked up at me with tears in his eyes. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to help me in the garage, the one who asked a million questions and wanted to learn everything about engines and tools. "Yes, Dad. I knew." His voice was barely a whisper. "Beverly said you were getting confused, that you'd made some bad financial decisions, that we needed to protect you before you lost everything. She showed me research about elderly people who get taken advantage of by scammers, and she said family guardianship was the only way to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" "From yourself," she said. "From making mistakes that would cost you everything you'd worked for." Leonard wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I knew it felt wrong. But Beverly kept saying it was temporary, just until we could get you proper care." Beverly shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Leonard, shut up! Don't say another word!" But Leonard kept talking, like a dam had burst. She had it all planned out. She was going to sell this place and the business money, put you in a nice assisted living facility, and manage the rest of the money for your care. She said it was what loving family members do. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. It was easier than admitting that my wife was trying to steal from my father. Beverly jumped up from the couch. "This is harassment. We haven't done anything wrong. We were trying to help a confused old man who doesn't know what's best for himself. Dorothy pulled out another folder. Mrs. Brennan, would you like to explain these documents? She spread papers across the coffee table. These are internet searches conducted from your home computer over the past 6 months. How to have someone declared incompetent in Colorado. Guardianship laws, elderly parents. How long does guardianship process take? Can guardians sell property without consent? Beverly's face went white. Those searches were for research. I was trying to understand the legal process. For research? Stanley Foster leaned forward. Or for planning? Because I also have documentation of your visits to 4 different geriatric psychiatrists, where you told each one a consistent story about an elderly family member showing signs of dementia. Dorothy added another stack of photos. And these show you entering Mr. Brennan's property without permission yesterday, photographing his belongings, taking measurements of rooms. That's breaking and entering, Mrs. Brennan. We have keys. Leonard is his son. Leonard may be his son, Stanley said, but that doesn't give you the right to enter someone's home without permission and catalogue their possessions for sale. I looked at Beverly, this woman who had systematically planned to destroy my life, and I felt something I hadn't felt since my combat days, a cold, calculated determination to win at all costs. Beverly, there's something you don't know about me, something Leonard never told you. I walked over to the mantel where my military commendations were displayed. I didn't just serve 20 years in the army, I was military intelligence. My job was to spot threats, gather evidence, and neutralize enemies before they could cause damage. Beverly was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting a counterintelligence operation against you. Every conversation recorded, every move documented, every lie catalogued. I turned back to face her. You picked the wrong target. Dorothy spoke up. Mrs. Brennan, there's one more thing. I've been in contact with Helen Morrison, the 82-year-old woman you tried to defraud when you worked at Mountain View Care Center. She's agreed to testify about your pattern of targeting elderly victims. Beverly's composure finally cracked completely. You can't prove anything. It's all circumstantial evidence. No jury will convict based on internet searches and photographs. Maybe not, Stanley said. But we don't need a jury conviction. We just need to present this evidence to the judge handling your guardianship petition. Once they see documentation of your previous attempts to defraud elderly people, plus evidence of your systematic planning to steal Mr. Brennan's assets, that petition will be dismissed permanently. And, Dorothy added, I'll be filing a report with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation recommending criminal charges for attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. That's a felony in this state. Beverly looked around the room like a trapped animal, then grabbed her purse. I don't have to listen to this. Leonard, we're leaving. But Leonard didn't move. He was staring at his hands, probably realizing for the first time what kind of woman he'd married. Leonard isn't going anywhere, I said. Not until we finish this conversation. Beverly stormed toward the door. Fine. Handle this however you want. But don't expect me to stick around for whatever sick revenge fantasy you've cooked up. She slammed the door behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the kitchen window, I watched her throw her suitcases into Leonard's car and speed down the mountain road. She'll be back, Dorothy said. They always come back when they realize they've lost everything. No, she won't. Stanley was already on his phone. I'm calling the sheriff. There are warrants out for her arrest as of 2 hours ago. They caught Beverly at a gas station in Colorado Springs, trying to use Leonard's credit card to buy a bus ticket to Nevada. The arrest made the local news, woman arrested for elder fraud scheme. And suddenly everyone in town knew what had almost happened to me. The preliminary hearing was held the following week. Beverly's court-appointed lawyer tried to argue that his client was acting out of genuine concern for my welfare, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversations, the documented lies to medical professionals, her history with Helen Morrison. It all painted a clear picture of premeditated fraud. Beverly was sentenced to 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered to pay $25,000 in restitution for my legal costs and emotional distress. The judge called it a calculated, predatory scheme targeting a vulnerable senior citizen and recommended she serve the full sentence without possibility of early release. Leonard cooperated fully with the prosecution, testifying against Beverly and providing additional evidence about her plans. He wasn't charged, but his marriage was over and his relationship with me was hanging by a thread. 3 months after the trial, Leonard knocked on my door at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. He was carrying a toolbox, not a fancy one, just basic hand tools from the hardware store. "Dad, I know I don't deserve it, but would you teach me some things in your workshop? I want to learn to build something with my hands, like you did." I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He'd lost weight, looked older, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a kid. Determination. Respect. "What do you want to learn?" "Everything. Engines, welding, woodworking. I want to understand what it means to create something instead of just waiting for someone else to hand it to me." I opened the door to my workshop, the place where I'd spent thousands of hours building and fixing and creating. "Come on then. Let's start with the basics." 6 months later, Leonard had rebuilt his first engine, the original motor from my 1967 Chevy pickup. It wasn't perfect, but it ran, and more importantly, he'd done it himself. We worked side by side in that shop, father and son, talking about everything except Beverly and the trial and the year we'd almost lost each other forever. The VFW post threw me a recognition ceremony, honoring me not just for my military service, but for standing up to elder fraud and protecting other seniors in our community. They presented me with a plaque that reads, "Courage Under Fire, on Foreign Soil and Home Soil." That plaque sits on my mantle next to my military commendations, right below the American flag they gave me when I retired from the Army. People ask me how I knew what Beverly was planning, how I stayed one step ahead of someone who'd clearly done this before. The truth is simple. 20 years in the military teaches you to pay attention to your surroundings, to trust your instincts, and to act decisively when you spot a threat. Your age isn't a weakness, it's experience. Your years aren't a burden, they're wisdom. And when someone tries to convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too weak to protect what you've built, that's when you show them exactly how wrong they are. Family is something you earn through loyalty and respect, not something you're owed because of blood. Some people learn that lesson early. Others learn it in a courtroom. Leonard learned it in my workshop, one bolt at a time. That's my story. If it helps one person recognize when they're being manipulated, if it gives one older person the courage to fight back when someone tries to steal their dignity and their life's work, then everything I went through was worth it. Take care of yourselves. Stay sharp. And remember, you didn't survive this long just to let someone else decide how your story ends. The moment someone tells you that your experience doesn't matter because of your age, that's the moment you know they're trying to take something that belongs to you. And that's exactly when you fight back with everything you've learned in those years they're trying to dismiss. Real strength isn't about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about recognizing a threat before it destroys you, having the patience to gather your evidence, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the people you love most are the ones you have to protect yourself from.